JB, hello everybody, and thanks very much to Somnath for inviting me to take part in this project, and to Ankush for filming. My name is Jonathan Galton, and I'm a lecturer in social science at University College London, UCL. And I'm going to talk about my book, Fake Gods and False History, Being Indian in the Contested Mumbai Neighbourhood. The book was published in November 2023 by UCL Press. And let's just get the sales pitch out of the way. It is available to buy from the UCL Press website. It's also available to download for free as a PDF, completely above board. It's completely open access. And that's also can be done from the UCL Press website. So we'll include a link to that in the description under the video. The book is based on anthropology fieldwork I conducted as part of my PhD in Mumbai. And I spent time in a neighbourhood called the BDD Chawls. Chawls being a particular type of residential building quite prevalent in Mumbai. And in the book, I engage with a range of questions and sort of themes around identity, politics, nationalism, religion, both Hinduism and Buddhism, and the Hindu caste system, and above all, I guess the kind of overarching theme is history. How do people live with, talk about, and think about history in their everyday lives? So you might be wondering, well, how on earth did I end up in this neighbourhood? And sort of asking these questions. So I'll talk a little bit about the background and what led up to this project. I'll then say something about the research process, and then link that to some of the key themes in the book. And finally, think about the process of writing and turning a PhD into a book. So I sometimes say that India is my longest term relationship. I first visited in 2003. Library. I was teaching English in a small town called Kovalpatti in South India, in Tamil Nadu. And clearly there are questions we can raise about sort of British teenagers going off and teaching English around the world. Let's park those to one side for now and just simply acknowledge that this happened. And it was hugely influential in shaping who I am today, particularly shaping my worldview, my way of engaging with the world. And above all, it left me with an enduring love for and fascination with India and South Asia more generally. So over the next sort of 10, 15 years, I went back to India several times to various parts of the country. But I was particularly drawn to Mumbai for a number of reasons. One of which was language. Now, Mumbai, as I'm sure many of you all know, is situated in Maharashtra state, where the dominant regional language is Marathi. And for any Marathi speakers watching, जय भीम, नमस्कार. मला थोडं मराठी येते, पण मी आता विसरलो. पण मला वाटतं की मराठी खूप सुंदर भाषा आहे, पण खूप अवघड, खूप कठीण. Which is a very mangled way of saying I speak some Marathi, but now I've sadly forgotten quite a lot of it. But I do think it's a beautiful language, albeit quite difficult. So as expected in Mumbai, there's a large Marathi-speaking population. It's a dominant language numerically. But there are many other linguistic communities. There are Gujarati speakers, Hindi speakers, Tamil speakers, etc., etc. And interestingly, the city as a whole doesn't really function in Marathi as a common language, but much more so in Hindi, a very kind of Mumbai-specific form of Hindi. Mumbai is also, of course, the hub of the Hindi language film industry, Bollywood. So I was really intrigued by this particular type of linguistic diversity. I'd never come across a setup quite like it. And I'm not going to bore you with the ins and outs of my life, but as I approached the age of 30, I decided that what I really wanted to do was study this in more detail and write a book about it, and ideally try and understand language use, language politics, and language identity in Mumbai from the vantage point of a single street or neighborhood. So I enrolled into the anthropology department of SOAS, that's a School of Oriental and African Studies in London, to start a PhD. I spent a few years preparing things. I spoke some Hindi already, but I took Hindi classes at SOAS. I also took some Marathi classes privately. And I arrived in Mumbai at the beginning of 2017 for a year of fieldwork. I was very lucky to almost immediately stumble across this site, the BDD Chawls in Parel. And in many ways, this was the kind of the perfect field site, not least because of the immense generosity, both in terms of time and spirit of some of the people that lived there. So that was great. What was less great was that I realized very early on, within a few weeks, that while my language skills were sufficient, and this is particularly the Hindi, they were sufficient to converse, and so they were a sufficient medium in which to conduct research. There was no way I could really conduct research, or do research on language as a focus, for language to be the subject of study. So that was a slightly humbling realization. In retrospect, it was extremely overambitious, not to mention arrogant of me, to imagine I could have ever done that kind of project. So I spent the better part of the year trying to figure out what it is that I'm interested in. What am I researching here? What are the key questions? And I decided that really the most sensible option was to actually listen to the people who live in the neighbourhood. What matters to them? What do they think I should be researching? And it's quite a diverse neighbourhood in terms of different communities living there. So there are correspondingly quite a diverse number of answers to that question. But one community I spent a lot of time with and made a lot of friends within the community, I refer to in the book as the Dalit Buddhist community. Now, this community traditionally belonged to the Mahar caste. The Mahars were historically an untouchable community, which meant they were subject to a wide range of privations, oppression, humiliation, violence, at the hands of dominant caste Hindus. And while the practice of untouchability has been outlawed since the adoption of the Constitution of India in 1950, as I think we all know, legal changes don't magically disappear these social oppressions and social structures overnight. So this is a long, ongoing process. But the term that the community used of themselves was the more familiar generic term for former untouchable communities, just Dalit, Marathi word, meaning broken or oppressed. And as I say, I got to know a lot of members of this community and realized that a lot of them were very politically active and extremely engaged in questions of social justice. And part of this meant a fierce opposition to the ruling Hindu nationalist dispensation and a more principled opposition to Hinduism and the caste system generally. Running through all of that, I really picked up on this quite visceral, everyday sort of preoccupation with history. And it really felt like my Dalit Buddhist friends really cared about educating me, the researcher, about Indian history and certain aspects of Indian history that I might perhaps not be so familiar with. So one figure that we kept coming back to in our conversations, who was unquestionably the most famous Mahar ever, was, of course, Dr. Bhimrao or Babasaheb Ambedkar. I'm well aware, of course, there will be people watching who know far more than I do about Ambedkar. When I first came to Mumbai, I'd heard of Ambedkar, of course, and I knew something about his life. But it was really through these kind of ongoing conversations with my Dalit Buddhist interlocutors that I came to appreciate the full extent of Ambedkar's life and thought and works. As a scholar, a writer, a historian, an economist, but also a lawyer, a community leader, a social reformer, politician and lawmaker, the chief architect of the Constitution of India. And the thing that we kept coming back to was how in the year of his death, 1956, Ambedkar led the Mahar community en masse out of Hinduism and into Buddhism as a way of trying to escape the strictures of the Hindu caste system. The title of the book, Fake Gods and False History, refers to some of the terms that Dalit Buddhist friends of mine used to actually refer to Hinduism. So I was told repeatedly, look, Hinduism is not an indigenous Indian religion. It was imposed by invaders coming from the outside. They referred to them as Arya or Aryans. And this was thousands of years ago. And these invading Aryans, as a way of subjugating the indigenous Indian population, imposed a range of techniques of thought control, one of which was sort of invented Hindu deities, that's the fake gods. Another was a very sort of fabricated, revisionist, Hindu-centric narrative of Indian history, false history. So in that light, the conversion to Buddhism was really seen as a reclaiming of pre-Hindu, indigenous Indian values of rationalism, of egalitarianism, and even secularism. And all of this then sort of, understanding all of this made the kind of political approaches of the community made much more sense, particularly their claim, which I initially found quite disconcerting, to be the true nationalists of India. So in chapter 4 of the book, I really sort of grapple with these questions and sort of juxtapose them with scholarly debates about ancient Indian history and this idea of an Aryan invasion or Aryan migration. So that's one of the key themes of the book. Another big strand of history connects to my own experiences as a white British researcher conducting research in a former British colony. And again, that prompts a kind of host of thorny ethical questions, which I would say I engage with in the book. I don't necessarily resolve, because I think there are no sort of easy answers there. But this came sharply into focus when I was invited to take part in the 200th anniversary commemoration of a battle. So I was told months in advance I must keep the 31st of December free, because we're going to go off to this village called Bhima Koregaon and celebrate a battle that had taken place on the 1st of January 1818. And what I was told was that this was a battle in which a band of Mahar fighters had vanquished the forces of the Peshwa, who were the Maharashtrian, the Hindu Brahmin rulers of what was then called the Maratha Empire in Western India. So this is very much a victory against caste oppression and casteism. So I was only too glad to take part. I said, absolutely, count me in. I'll put in my diary. And I then went off and did what any seasoned researcher would do. I went to Wikipedia and I looked up the Battle of Koregaon. And to my absolute horror, I discovered that this band of Mahar fighters, the Mahar Regiment or Mahar Battalion, had been fighting on behalf of the British East India Company. And this battle was part of the Third Anglo-Maratha War, and was actually a really key turning point in the consolidation of British rule over Western India. So I went back, absolutely appalled, to my friends and said, look, what's going on? Why on earth are you celebrating this British colonial victory? What's this about? And the question didn't quite land somehow. I was sort of told, well, no, I mean, we're celebrating first and foremost is a victory against caste oppression that we're celebrating. And yes, the Mahars were fighting on behalf of the British, but the British actually came and liberated us from the Peshwa rulers. And my friend Anish made this sort of gesture and said, look, Dalits and British, we've been friends since 1818. And that made me profoundly uncomfortable. Because, I was coming very much from this kind of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist perspective. And here I was being implicitly sort of drafted in as the representative of the British part of this sort of Dalit-British alliance. And so this conversation continued sort of, unfolded over many months, but we never really got anywhere. And again, this is something I grapple with in the book, particularly in chapter 6. I don't come to any neat resolution because I don't think there is one. What I would say, I think this is perhaps an example of where it's really important to be able to think on different levels. So for me, at least, the kind of overarching top level is very much my sort of conviction that British rule in India was an immensely damaging enterprise. It caused huge economic damage. It was highly extractive. It also was very detrimental to existing social fabrics and has left a pernicious legacy that sort of impacts negatively on India across the board, including on Dalit communities. But I think it should be possible to sort of maintain that sort of top-level ethical commitment to the colonial thinking while also acknowledging that there are groups of people, including, but my name is limited to the Dalit Buddhist community, for whom there might be a slightly different memory. And in this particular local sense, the British are remembered as liberators. Anyway, the actual celebrations that took place on the 1st of January 2018, these became rapidly notorious across India because they erupted in violence and clashes between the Dalits celebrating, people that come from all over India to celebrate, and the local dominant caste Maratha community. This then sort of spilled out into protests in Mumbai and further afield, and as a sort of side plot twist, shortly afterwards, or in the months that followed, 16 Indian human rights activists were arrested on really spurious, trumped-up charges connecting them to the violence and also to some of the things that have been going on around the Bhima Koregaon celebrations. So this was really elevated from a rather obscure local celebration to this national level flashpoint, really. So it was quite extraordinary to have been there at that time. We actually, I should just say, we left before any of the violence kicked off. So our group of people were sort of slightly spared all of that. A few weeks after those celebrations, or the Bhima Koregaon incidents, I left India. That nothing to do with that. I was going back anyway. And I spent the next sort of year and a half writing up the PhD thesis. And I had the oral exam, the Viva, in late 2019. Wrapped everything up basically in early 2020, just in time for COVID. And then spent, I guess, the better part of 2 years really thinking about how to turn this into a book. I always knew I wanted to write a book. But it took quite a lot of sort of thinking and rethinking, a few false starts, a number of rejections from publishers, and a quick note to anyone out there who's writing a book or wants to write a book, be prepared to embrace rejection, because it does happen. Eventually, I just decided, I asked myself, what is, for you, for me, what is the most interesting thing? What is the really overriding question? And I came back to this idea of history, because history had kind of run throughout my experiences. And so history, this idea about not history kind of in terms of what actually happened, but history in terms of how people talk about history and how people use history in different contexts. That is the overall organizing theme across the book. And a final piece of history actually that unfolded really after I left the neighborhood and is ongoing is that there are 32 buildings in this BDD Chawls neighborhood. Of those, about half at least now don't exist anymore. They've been demolished, and the whole neighborhood's going to be demolished in preparation for being redeveloped as a neighborhood of tower blocks. And I won't give too many spoilers here, but this whole prospect of demolition and redevelopment was a very live debate while I was there throughout 2017. And interestingly, a lot of these questions of history and religion, all of them sort of crept into these debates in a range of interesting ways. Last thing, I was asked to say something about the reception of the book. And I had to say, I can't really tell you. You sort of release these things into the world and then don't necessarily know how it's kind of gone down. I've had people in India and further afield have said nice things about it, and I think appreciated the sort of complexity and the ambiguity. But really, I'd say if anyone's interested, do feel free to either purchase a copy or to download a copy. You can dip into it, you don't have to read all of it, but I'd love to know what you think. Thank you very much.